If Israel is to rule the world, therefore Israel has to wage big wars, like the United States did, like Britain did. And the first target of Israel's wars will have to be the Arabs, to subdue the Arabs. But in the Arab world, there is one country which is more important than all the rest. Which one is that? It's Egypt. Why Egypt? Again, it's only ilmu akhir zaman which can answer that question. In the Bible, they rewrote, they put in with their own hands in the Bible, in the Torah, that the Holy Land extends from the river of Egypt, the river Nile, to the river Euphrates. All of this is the Holy Land. That's false. When we go to the Quran and we go to the Hadith of Nabi Muhammad ﷺ, we know that this is false, but it's there. So for Dajjal to convince the Jews that he is indeed the Messiah, the state of Israel will have to extend its frontiers to encompass the biblical frontiers, the false biblical frontiers of the Holy Land. And so now we can understand why NATO is in Iraq, up to the Euphrates, occupying this territory, because Israel has to reach the Euphrates. But what about Egypt? An Egyptian sent me an email 2 weeks ago to say, Sheikh Imran, the Israeli embassy in Egypt is never located on the east bank of the river Nile. No. All the other embassies are there, but not Israel. The Israeli embassy in Cairo is always on the west bank of the river Nile. Why? Because the Jews believe that's their land. So how can they establish their embassy in their land? The territory, which is known as the Eastern Delta. In the Quran, the Eastern Delta is referred to as Misr. Today the whole of Egypt is known as Misr, but not the Quran. This Eastern Delta is where the Jews lived for a few hundred years. When Yusuf alayhi salam was taken, they took him out of the well and they sold him in Egypt. And then the whole of Banu Israel were brought to Egypt. And they lived in that Eastern Delta for a few hundred years. And that's why they wrote in the Torah that this is a part of the Holy Land. If Israel is to launch an attack on Egypt, to take that territory, you can't do it with only drones and helicopter gunships and missiles landing from the air. You have to launch a ground invasion to take that territory. And so now we can understand at least this part of the Arab uprisings. But in Libya it was not like that. This was not an uprising. This was a long planned armed insurrection, not an uprising. NATO worked very hard. And NATO had friends in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia to help them, and in Turkey to help them, to get the arms into Libya in advance. And then when the call was given, the armed uprising takes place. NATO needed a Security Council resolution to allow them to attack Libya from the sky. And when the resolution came before the Security Council, Russia and China decided to abstain from the vote. What are the implications of the success of NATO and of the Muslims in Libya who launched the attack and succeeded, at least in Tripoli, in bringing down the government of Muammar al-Gaddafi, and then winning recognition, diplomatic recognition around the world, even Malaysia, one of the first states to recognize the new regime in Libya was Malaysia. The implications of the fall of the Libyan government is that NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, will now be in Libya for the next 25 years. They're not going to leave. They wanted Libya for a particular reason that our Muslim brothers could not understand: eating halwa. They wanted to be in Libya because Egypt is the target. And you have to send in ground troops into Egypt. You can't do it with drones as you're doing it in Pakistan. And so now with the success in Libya, when Israel launches her attack on Egypt, Israel will launch the attack from the east, and NATO will launch the attack from the west, ground troops. This is in addition to the air, and this is in addition to a naval blockade of Egypt. Will the Egyptian government survive? Will the Egyptian state survive? Given the pathetic state of Islamic scholarship today, I don't see any obstacle in the way of their achieving their objective in Egypt. But they're not going to stop with simply seizing the eastern delta. They're going to break up Egypt into small bits and pieces so that the small bits and pieces can never pose a threat to Israel. A word for the so-called mujahideen who waged the struggle against Gaddafi. I hope you're listening to me. And I hope all the other allies of NATO, including the Turkish Prime Minister, are listening to me. Here is a verse of the Quran. And you do well to study the Quran. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a statement of profound importance. And in this verse, He explains to us the world today. Listen one more time. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who have faith in Allah. La tattakhidhu al-yahuda wal-nasara awliya. Do not take the Jews and do not take the Christians as your friends and allies. If we use the lazy man's methodology, the defective methodology, we will come to the conclusion that Allah is speaking about all Christians and He's speaking about all Jews. This is a lazy man's methodology. But when you use the proper methodology, you see something else. بَعْدُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. Do not take such Jews and do not take such Christians as your friends and allies, who themselves are friends and allies of each other. The Quran is anticipating a time to come when part of the Christian world and part of the Jewish world are going to effect a mysterious reconciliation. I wish I could give this lecture in Bahasa, you know. I have to use the English language. That part of the Christian world and part of the Jewish world are going to effect a mysterious reconciliation. When that Jewish-Christian alliance emerges, Allah says, لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء. Do not be friends and allies of these people. Allah is not speaking about an individual Jew who has a Christian as his neighbor and the two are friends of each other. Not at all. He's talking about an alliance between two people. That alliance has come into being today. It is the Zionist Jews and Zionist Christians who have forged that alliance. They are the ones who gave us the International Monetary Fund. They are the ones who gave us the United Nations organization, controlled by the Security Council. And in the Security Council, the Zionists are in control. So Palestine wants to become a member of the UN. And when Palestine becomes a member of the UN, you're now obliged to obey the Charter. And the Charter says Allah is not Al-Akbar. The Charter says the supreme authority in the world in all matters pertaining to international peace and security resides with the Security Council. When the Security Council says stand up, you're going to stand up. When it says sit down, you're going to sit down. How are you going to answer to Allah for that massive betrayal of Allah and His Messenger? But Palestine wants to become a member of the Security Council. I mean the United Nations. وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُم مِّنكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ, says Allah. Whoever turns to them for friendship and alliance, as Saudi Arabia has done, as Turkey has done, a member of NATO, as the elite in Pakistan have done, as the elite in Egypt has done, as Jordan have done. Whosoever turns to them for friendship and alliance, فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ, Allah says in the Quran, you've lost your Islam. You've lost your Islam. You now belong to them. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ. Surely Allah provides no guidance for wicked people. And so the trademark of that alliance is going to be wickedness. And what did they do in Libya? These brothers of ours who were taken for a ride, who had eyes and yet could not see, they joined the alliance with NATO. They called for NATO to come and bomb. And now they are riding triumphantly that we have liberated Libya. No, you have not. NATO is in control. And you'll have to answer to Allah on the last day because you lost your Islam. Not only that, you now have a rope around Egypt's neck. And that rope is tightening now because Egypt is now in a perilous situation. NATO will attack from the west, Israel will attack from the east.